Hi, and welcome to the show. Most people don't know what to expect or do when faced with a legal problem, whether it be in labor law, matrimonial, debt counseling, property law, or more. We aim to give our viewers a broad understanding of the law in South Africa and to make sure that the vulnerable are not taken advantage of. In this show, we address specific questions aimed at answering your questions as a viewer. So don't forget to send us your legal questions that you want to have answered. At the end of the show, we'll provide you with the info, such as our email address and our WhatsApp number, where you can send those questions to. I'm your host, Fazluddin Abrams, and you're watching the Fazlaw Show. With me today, we have a legal expert attorney named Irshan Higgins. Irshan is a person who has a passion for human rights. He's a specialist in alternative dispute resolution, insolvency law, sports management, and corporate law. With his leisure time, he's an inspiring master chef, and he's the founder and curator of the Cape Muslim Slave Heritage Museum, located currently at the Cape Castle of Good Hope. Irshan, thank you for being again on my show.
Assalamu alaikum to you, Fazluddin, and assalamu alaikum and good evening to your viewers.
Thank you. Irshan, I think we have a very important topic today, and that is with regards to whether a Muslim marriage is being recognized in South Africa or not. So I'm going to dive just into the questions, and I believe that you are a perfect person to discuss it because I know you have made strides in this particular topic, where you were quite instrumental in the first, or one of the first cases to give recognition to spouses in a Muslim marriage. Correct?
Yes.
Right. So there's in order for Muslim marriages to be recognized in South African law, currently a separate civil ceremony needs to be entered into in terms of the Marriage Act, and also, or alternatively, a civil union act, which means a civil union needs to take place between two parties for that marriage to be recognized. So I needed to explain to the viewers what the difference is between a civil marriage and a Muslim marriage.
Okay, Fazluddin, thanks for that question, and I think I will get to that question. But I think maybe one must look at the history of this problematic matrimonial regime system in South Africa. Now, remember when the slaves and the the slaves, freedom fighters.
Just bear in mind we've limited time.
No, I
We've
know,
got
but I want to give that.
it's important. If you can summarize the history for us, it's very important that the viewers get to know that.
Okay, so when slaves and freedom fighters got to South Africa, Islam was actually banned. Okay, so Islam was already banned in 1642 by a plakaten, the Dutch plakaten. And then when the slaves arrived here around about 1658, it was still banned. So Islam was regarded as a religion of heathens, infidels. So their marriages were regarded as what we call in Latin contra bonus mores, in other words, against good morals. So unfortunately, that particular viewpoint held sway with government and the judiciary for almost like 350 years. And right up till today, our legislature, after 28 years of us being in this democracy, we still don't have the Muslim marriages recognized by the legislature. In other words, it's not on the statute book. However, the nice thing is, and I think the saving grace of this whole thing is, that Muslim marriages are no longer regarded as contra bonus mores by the courts of this country. The judiciary is quite enlightened in that regard. There was cases like the Hassam case, well, maybe the Jacobs case first. That is where they first recognized the validity of a Muslim marriage in a court case. The second, but it was a limited recognition. It was only recognized a Muslim marriage if it was a monogamous marriage. Then the Hassam case came along, and that's where I was involved in. I took the matter to the Constitutional Court, where we took it a little bit further, that all marriages, irrespective of whether it is monogamous or polygamous or potentially polygamous, must be recognized by the courts. So in that way, the judiciary recognized Muslim marriages, right? Now, coming back to your question, where there's a parallel between what's happening in the Matrimonial Property Act, which is a civil marriage, and a Muslim marriage, which is more a sacrament. But this particular sacrament has now been recognized by the judiciary. It's only the legislature that is lagging behind in terms of not recognizing Muslim marriages. I mean, African customary marriages has been recognized. Even the gay marriages has been recognized. And for some reason, the Muslim marriages has not been recognized as yet. However, I want to say that I am not blaming government entirely. I'm not blaming the bureaucracy. I'm not blaming the legislature. I think the Muslims has been their own worst enemy in this regard. They could not come to a common agreement and understanding about what should be contained in the legislation.
Sure, we need to start wrapping up for the first segment.
Yeah.
But I want you to just quickly answer the question for me. And I'm going to make a statement. So if we say that the judiciary now recognizes Muslim marriages, but our law in the country has not set the rules and regulations
it's not
and
in
the statute.
statute.
Yes, sure. And then that ultimately says that this country has still seen the Muslim marriage as something as being uncivilized.
No, I think it's just, I don't think it's even as harsh as that.
We need to wrap up.
I think it's more a question of that the content of the legislation has not been agreed upon.
Okay, right. So ladies and gentlemen, viewers, we've come to the end of this segment. There's a lot to discuss. You can see it's a very important topic, and we will definitely come back to you after the break. I'll see you soon. My name is Fazlaw Abrams. Thank you. Welcome back to the show. In the first segment, we spoke about the issue of a marriage according to Muslim rights and civil marriages. We also had an introduction to our special guest, legal expert, Irshan Higgins. And we are now going to continue your conversation that is needed in order to answer your questions to the show. I'm your host, Fazlaw Abrams, and you're watching the Fazlaw Show. Irshan, now, we thank you for giving us a foundation on the history of Muslim marriages and also how the Islamic religion came to the Cape and how they were recognized or not. So I've got a couple of statements that I need you to explain to the viewers. And the first one is a decree of divorce is not required for a dissolution of a Muslim marriages in our courts, South African courts. Can you explain that to the viewers, please?
Yeah, firstly, in South Africa, we have what we call the Divorce Act. And all divorces are actually dealt with in terms of that act, and it emanates from the Matrimonial Property Act, okay? The marriages like in community, the one out of community, and the one out of community, including the accrual. So those marriages all emanate from the Matrimonial Property Act. And of course, those marriages can be dissolved in terms of the Divorce Act. In Islamic marriages, as you all know, I mean, as a lot of the viewers will know, you get married in a mosque with an imam, or wherever the imam chooses to have the venue. And that imam then puts through a Muslim marriage. Now I'm going to get to the part where certain members of the Muslim clergy has been ordained as marriage officers, but that's a separate issue. But if normally the marriage would happen in a mosque, and you do like the Islamic marriage, and of course when you get the divorce, you don't have to go to court. You actually can just pronounce, the male can pronounce a divorce. It's what you call a talaq. Or a woman, if a man refuses to give a talaq, or he doesn't want to give a talaq, the woman can go apply for what you call a fasakh, which is basically a much longer process, and it has the intervention of an Islamic body like the Muslim Judicial Council or ICSA or any of the or Shura. But that's a long process. Whereas the process for the man is quite easy. He basically he gets his witnesses, he pronounces a talaq, and then the woman will also have to undergo her period of confinement, which is also known as the iddah. So I think it's a bit, but it's a bit one-sided in that regard, that the man does not have to have all that processes. Because for a woman to do the fasakh, I mean, it's a lengthy process, and I think it is aimed at one, maybe preserving the marriage. Hopefully the parties can find each other, and of course to make sure that the woman is not actually pregnant, in that period. And so I think the sound reasons why the Sharia has given that iddah period for people to reconsider their actions. And those things, I believe it's quite easy to have those particular religious instructions. It's easy for it to be contained into legislation in South Africa. It's not. It doesn't conflict with our constitution. It doesn't constitute. I mean, we do have the right of freedom of religion in this country. So any piece of legislation, that will benefit Muslims can actually be contained in a piece of legislation. I personally feel that the delay is unnecessary, because we're getting a lot of hardship from women, especially women that's been part of their husband's structure in terms of his finances, his proprietary interests since day one. I mean, the man and woman both start out with nothing. They maybe live in a small little, let's call it a quarters next to the house, or in a room in the parents' house, and they build up a little estate. So at the end of the estate, we normally find, especially in the Western Cape and in Gauteng, that the man sits with all the assets in his name, and the wife, who's worked very hard, and in that marriage, only to be told by the husband that you didn't work, which I think is completely wrong, because a woman that cleans house, looks after the household, does the shopping, looks after the children, sees to her husband in all respects. For a man to tell a woman you did not work, I don't think he understands the nature and the concept of what constitutes the definition of work.
Nor does he understand the concept or the responsibility of a woman. He doesn't give recognition to it. You also don't recognize the fact that whatever she does is more valuable, or as valuable as him waking up in the morning, going to work and coming back.
But she is the enabler. She makes sure that man can get up in the morning to go work. He's got clean clothing, he's got food, and when he comes home, he comes to a clean house. Children are being raised practically by that woman.
So one can say, in a sense, that currently we have males out there using the rules and regulations of a religious marriage to their benefit, but when it comes to the dissolution of it, they also want to use the civil concept to their benefit and ignore the responsibility to nafaka, and I mean, that's taking the responsibility of seeing to your spouse even after the marriage, and your children more particularly after the marriage. So they're kind of like playing balls. But we want to move on to the next question, and we can discuss this further in another segment. Just quickly, so we have recent case law that came to the fore, and there was, and I think just briefly, if you can touch on that.
Okay.
Then we'll continue that conversation in our next segment.
Now, as you know, there was a lot of frustration by women, especially in this country, that why is it taking so long to bring about legislation? And then, of course, the Women's Legal Center, headed up by two very dynamic women. The woman that started with this process was a woman called Huda Abrams. She started with this particular case, and then, of course, when she left there, it was taken over by Sheham Samai.
So we're going to talk about the fact that there are certain acts, the Marriage Act and the Divorce Act, which has now been declared certain sections inconsistent, and we're going to go on. So viewers, if you're watching, keep watching. You can see it's a very important debate, And if you want more answers to your questions, you follow up on the next segment to follow. But we have to take a break, and we'll be back soon. I'm your host, Fazlaw Abrams, and you're watching the Fazlaw Show. Welcome back to the Fazlaw Show. I'm your host, Fazlaw Abrams, and our topic of discussion is the difference between civil marriages and Muslim marriages, but more importantly, the recognition of Muslim marriages in South African law. With me is legal expert Ihsan Higgins. And Ihsan, thank you. So far, it's been a very interesting discussion. And in our last segment, we'd like to just wrap it up for the viewers and make sure that they get the content that is expected. And that is ultimately what is the role of government now to give recognition to these one, Islamic marriages, and more importantly, what happens with the dissolution of an Islamic marriage, please.
Okay, so as we said earlier on, the Women's Legal Center, headed up by previously Huda Abrams and now Shyam Samai, they took the government to court, basically. They said to the government, listen, so they took the president of the RSA and various ministers of justice and everybody, cited on those papers. And the court actually said, listen, this is actually quite an untenable situation. We need to have legislation. So, I mean, it's a landmark type of action, because it's like basically saying to government, listen here, we want you to pass legislation because it's creating hardship by not having all these frameworks in place. So the Supreme Court of Appeal basically said, listen, we are giving government 24 months. And that judgment was handed down on the 18th of December 2020. So which means on the 18th of December 2022, which is the end of this year.
That's D-Day for government.
D-Day for government, where they must have their legislation in place. And I mean, there's sections 9, 10, 28, and 34 of the Divorce Act and the Marriage Act. Basically contravenes those particular sections of the Constitution.
I want to stop you there. To the viewers, we've heard now section 9, 6, 28, 24,
9,
and so
10,
forth.
24, and 34.
We will have another topic on this. There will be another episode. We will unpack the Divorce Act and all these sections. So not to worry, you'll get some more information from us. Thank you.
Yeah, so basically the court they said, listen, it's an untenable situation. Fix it. So we're giving you 24 months. So let's see, let's watch that space. And activists like myself and many other people are watching that space. We are pushing very hard as lobbyists to get the stuff in order. So in that way, you will actually have what I would call a tenable situation for Muslim women especially. And I mean, it seems like we're now pushing the women's agenda. We're not. We're pushing a social justice. Yeah. There must be social justice in marriage and in divorce. So you can't have a situation where somebody worked for 20 years in a marriage and then she walks away with absolutely nothing. So legislation is coming, and I want the men to also support this, because the point is you also have daughters, you also have sisters, and they are the very people that will get prejudiced by the fact that there's no legislation. Now the reason why I say this can work, 20 years ago, I spent about 2 weeks at the Sharia court in Singapore, where they have a similar type of demographic like South Africa. In other words, Muslims vis-a-vis the Chinese or Singaporeans. And it's also about a 2% population of Muslims. But they have a specific act relating to Muslim marriages.
So unpack that for us. And if we can recognize international law, then certainly those regulations and rules can possibly be a foundation for this.
In that case, I mean, people here made the argument that by having Muslim marriages in legislation will contravene the Constitution of South Africa. Now, in that country, there's perfect legislation. It doesn't contravene the legislation, the Constitution, or the other laws.
Yeah. So let's unpack that. I don't want to run out of time.
So if it can work in harmony in another country, I can't see why it can't work in harmony in South Africa. But there must be political will. I mean, now they're forced in a way. It's sad, actually, that it came to that. That the judiciary is now forcing the legislature's hand. But it will happen. I'm very confident that, there's already been a draft put forward. Nothing happened to the draft because once again the Muslims were their own enemies in that regard. They fought each other on this issue. There was the right-wing position and of course the more progressive position. I think that is going to dissipate, and inshallah we will have that type of legislation in place by the end of this year.
So I want to talk about the redistribution at time of divorce. So in a civil marriage, you have your assets, which is your house, your motor vehicles, your furniture,
Yeah.
and then you have your debt to look at. You also have your pension, value of the pension at time of divorce. And then you have the different marital regimes. You have your in-community of property, which is the clean break principle, and 50-50. So each party is entitled to 50% of the net value of the estate. That's all assets minus liabilities, or each party pay their own debt. You also have your your out of community of property with the accrual system, which is a formal calculation that is done to determine at time of divorce what each party would be entitled to. With regards to Sharia law, Islamic marriages, Muslim marriages, what are we looking at? Quickly, we've got about 2 minutes left.
If a couple, I mean, Muslim marriages is predominantly, it lends itself to a marriage out of community of property. Like, you know, what's yours is yours, what's mine is mine, and that's the end of the story. However, when after the legislation has been passed, one has to look at the Muslim marriages not in the context of the Matrimonial Property Act. It's like we're trying to fit something into something that that's not going to actually we're trying to fit something into a matrimonial regime that is not designed for Muslim marriages. So we will have to look at the legislation and the current reality and try to push forward a solution that is that's an Islamic solution to this. But it can happen, but I don't think one must try to push hard onto the current matrimonial property act just to make it fit. We need to look at creative solutions to come to the right decision.
Okay. So ultimately what we're saying is that whatever Sharia prescribes in benefit to the spouse, the now divorced spouse, and the children should be not only recognized but should be enforceable in a court of law. If there's an act created, and that is ultimately
but remember,
that will give the foundation.
The act will deal with the issues of proprietary consequences. In other words, assets and liabilities. The children is still regarded, the High Court of South Africa is still regarded as the upper guardian of all minor children.
Right.
So when it comes to children, the normal legislation can prevail because ultimately it's what's in the best interest of children.
Sure.
It's not about new legislation having to be created. The legislation for children is already there.
And that will always be seen to. Irshan, thank you for being on the show. We've come to the end. Viewers, thank you for watching the Fazlaw show. We've come to the end of this episode, and we ask you to send in your questions via our email and WhatsApp platform. Our email will be on the screen. It's info@fazlaw.co.za, and our WhatsApp number is 082-495-8989. Our next episode for discussion would be, what can I claim for when I buy a motor vehicle that is defective? In other words, the property law of not immovable but movable items. So when you purchase anything that's movable, whether it's a car, furniture, and those items are defective, and you now need to take on the supplier, what can be done and what are your rights, and how do you calculate your damage? Also, please follow us on our YouTube channel, the Facebook, Twitter, and also Instagram platforms, and send in your questions. I'm your host, Fazluddin Abrams, and thank you for watching the Fazlaw Show.